On today's Story Beat.
I want to be seen as the authority. I want to be seen as, if something's important to you, it's important to me. I remember cops saying to me, "Why are you going out to crime scenes at night?" I was like, "Because you guys are. If you guys are out here, I want to be out here. This isn't a 9-to-5 job. You're not going to get ahead. You're not going to find out the things you need, make the connections you need by working banker's hours. I work whatever it takes to get stuff done, and I want to be seen as an authority."
This is StoryBeat with Steve Cuden, a podcast for the creative mind. StoryBeat explores how masters of creativity develop and produce brilliant works that people everywhere love and admire. So join us as we discover how talented creators find success in the worlds of imagination and entertainment. Here now is your host, Steve Cuden.
Thanks for joining us on StoryBeat. We're coming to you from the Steel City, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. My guest today, Justin Fenton, was a reporter for the Baltimore Sun for 17 years. A graduate of the University of Maryland, College Park, Justin worked as a reporter and editor for the student newspaper, the Diamondback, and then started at the Sun as an intern. In 2010, Justin's reporting led to an overhaul in how Baltimore police officers investigate sexual assaults. He was part of the Pulitzer Prize finalist staff recognized for their coverage of the Baltimore riots that followed the death of Freddie Gray. He was also one of the lead reporters who reported on Baltimore's gun trace task force scandal. Justin subsequently wrote a book depicting the entire case called We Own This City, which was later produced by HBO into a miniseries of the same name. Justin himself appears in 2 episodes of We Own This City, playing a press conference reporter. Along with several state awards, Justin is also a 2-time finalist for the National Livingston Award for Young Journalists. The Maryland Daily Record, the local legal and business newspaper, named Justin as an influential Marylander. So for all those reasons and many more, it's a true honor and a privilege for me to chat today with the great Baltimore reporter, Justin Fenton. Justin, welcome to StoryBeat.
Hey, thank you for having me.
Oh, the pleasure is all mine. Trust me. All right, so let's go back in time just a little bit. Where were you in life? At about what age when you thought to yourself, news, reporting, journalism, that looks interesting. I think I'll try my hand at least thinking about or going down that road.
Yeah, so I guess it was junior year of high school. I had average grades, I would say. I wasn't on any sports teams. I didn't do debate team. I didn't have a lot to put on a college resume. And I had delivered my hometown newspaper, the Annapolis Capital, and my family always got 2 newspapers. We got the Sun in the morning and the Capital in the evening, and so I always had newspapers around. And I enjoyed. I was very into humor at that point. I enjoyed David Letterman and things like that, and the humor of Steve Martin. And I thought, I wonder if I could write like essays. I wasn't really thinking about news at that point because I don't think a lot of high school kids, they think about sports and entertainment, I guess, and not so much news. But I thought I wanted to write. And so I started writing. And when you join the high school newspaper, they tell you got to report. So I had to start reporting, which was uncomfortable for me, got me out of my comfort zone. And I just took to it. So I was the editor of my high school paper. And at that point, I thought, let's keep this going. And I went on to the University of Maryland to the journalism school.
So why do you say that it was uncomfortable for you? Were you shy or were you afraid to talk to people or why?
Yeah, I think so. I stuttered growing up. I had to go to speech therapy. My grandfather had a really severe stutter. And so, speaking to people in general, I think was a challenge. But then I think maybe this is true for a lot of people, just interviewing people. I remember the first time I interviewed somebody, it was for a sports story. And I wrote down all the questions, like 1 through 10, and like handed it over to them. Said, write me back answers because I was uncomfortable interviewing. But you needed that information to write the story.
Right.
And so you realize over time that you're not going to be able to, write down questions and get written answers. You need to have conversations, and there's so much great stuff comes out of those conversations. So it just was. I think that's still a thing for me. I very much feel as a journalist that when I'm interviewing somebody, I feel, I don't know, I wouldn't say a power thing, but it's more so like, I have an agenda, I have a goal in mind, and I'm speaking to somebody for that reason. And I find that, like, if I don't have that reason, I kind of might shrink away a little bit. So, I think it's about getting out of your comfort zone.
Interesting. Okay. Well, I think that's a really excellent answer to, how do you overcome your shyness? I guess you just do it. You just get in there.
You do it because that's the way you're going to be able to do writing and do journalism, is by speaking to people and getting into those rooms and things like that. And you just got to get over it, basically.
Who early on did you look up to in the world of journalism? Were there any reporters or journalists that you thought, that's a really interesting career, I hope I can go down that kind of a road?
No specific names come to mind. I know that I did read Rolling Stone. I read Sports Illustrated. And so I was really into that sort of feature writing, the long form feature writing. Although, again, I don't think it, and even in that moment, I was really contemplating that. I think that it came to mind later that if I'm going to write, I would like to write stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember for my community newspaper, the Severna Park Voice, it's a monthly newspaper that's, mostly good news. So it's all good news. A kid I went to middle school with was like a top Major League Baseball prospect, and he was going to get drafted in the top like 5 picks and make millions of dollars. And I hadn't spoken to him in years, and I reconnected with him, and I said, you know what, I want to spend time with you. I'm not just going to interview you. I want to like hang out with you, and I want to get your sort of your vibe and your environment and things like that. And I wrote sort of like what for me at that age and in that that publication was like the closest I could come to writing a sort of Rolling Stone, Sports Illustrated type story. And so I think, when you finally cross over into daily journalism, professional journalism, there's a lot of moving the chains and sort of doing stories that are incremental, but you always, I always had in the back of my mind that these type sweeping kind of things are what I'm drawn to as a reader.
You prefer to read the bigger stories, not just these little tiny compartmentalized stories.
Yeah, I like when the writers have fun, when they have fun with the lead. I remember, the Rolling Stone articles always seem to lead with the writer sitting down with the subject at like a hotel bar or something. And I didn't particularly like that, but I felt like, just the exercise of sort of like you're thinking of ways to get into things like that and keeping them going. I was definitely drawn to that and continue to be drawn to that.
Do you think of yourself as a storyteller?
Absolutely. Yes. I think that the best news stories as a journalist that I do are ones that tell a tale. There's something interesting, particularly interesting about them. They read differently. I like it when I can challenge a reader's expectation, that sort of they expect a story that's very dry, and then you can actually do something that's much more engaging. So yeah, absolutely.
Well, it's not just the facts, ma'am. It's you have to actually engage the reader with something that has color to it in some way.
And that's hard to do. I mean, you really need to get the material to do that. You cannot just do that. You can't decide going in, I want this to read a certain way. The reporting has to lead you to the information that will allow you to write it that way.
I think that makes sense. And that I've been a storyteller my whole life, but I've told mostly fictional stories, not stories based on a truth or some reality. And it's the same kind of thing. You still have to draw the reader in some way, whether you're telling something based on reality or whether you're telling something that's completely made up. So at what point, you started fairly young in high school, that's young. Was there a point, whether it was in college or after, where you thought to yourself, you know what, I am pretty good at this. I do like doing it, and I want to make a career out of it. Was there some kind of a pivot point where you knew that?
I would say that I thought I was pretty good at it. Even in high school, writing, again, the story about the friend going into the Major League Baseball draft. I think I thought I was pretty good at it. Instead, I had a reality check moment where in sophomore year at the University of Maryland, they have a course where it's designed to essentially weed people out. They're very, very tough with the grading. Like if you make a single mistake in an article, you fail. And I was failing. I had a failing. I thought I'm really doing poorly at this. And I remember going into the assistant dean's office. I won't name him, and he was the one who everyone told us, you got to kiss the ring. Like, this is the guy. If you getting good with this guy, he will get you the best internships. He's a career maker. You have to get to know this guy and kiss up to him. And I went to his office and he told me, maybe this isn't for you. I basically went to him seeking reaffirmation that I'm failing this class, but please tell me that I'm worth it and I should stick with it. And he said, maybe this isn't for you. And I don't know, looking back, whether that was like a psychological thing, like that was to challenge me. But in the moment, I got very motivated in a I'm going to prove you wrong kind of sense. Mm-hmm. So yes, I've been confident in my own abilities, and in that moment, I got a real wake up call that I had to try harder and do better. Another time was like this same assistant dean. I was doing work for the college paper, and I think I was doing great work for the college paper. And he said, "Yeah, I agree. You shouldn't waste your time with anything less than the top 10 newspapers in the country, and don't even bother applying anywhere else." And I didn't get any internships that summer, and I was crushed. I wanted to be a news intern at a major paper, you know, the obvious ones, you know, Washington Post and Boston Globe, you know, Oregonian, New York Times, things like that. And I didn't get a bite. And so I had to suck it up. And I sent out a second wave of applications, and the Cincinnati Enquirer accepted me as a business desk intern. I had zero interest in being on the business desk. And I took this as a great affront. And I had such a great summer. There was one issue of the paper, which just for coincidence, I was on the front page of I was on the front page of the A section, the local section, the sports section, and the business section in one day. And I just was like so motivated to, like, again, prove people wrong. So yeah.
It's interesting. It works it works in a similar way in terms of show business, where if you tell somebody, a student, for instance, if you tell a student, you know what, I'm not sure you're keeping up to where we need you to be, or whatever your level should be, that sometimes motivates people and sometimes it doesn't. And I think that is a weeding process all by itself. And people who don't want to do what you do, because, correct me if I'm wrong, your job is difficult. It's not an easy job. And you don't want to go into that world not being fully engaged in it.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah.
So therefore, somebody saying to you, you know what, you're not cut out for this, and you saying, I'll show you, that's a pretty big motivator.
It could have gone either way. Yeah. I could have walked away, and but I doubled down.
All right. So then you eventually come out of school and go right into an internship. Is that right? At the Baltimore Sun?
Yes, they took me as a news desk intern that year, and I translated that into a full-time job, which at the time I was told was rare. People told me, you're not going to get hired. You're going to have to spend a year or 3 in, you know, Florida or New Hampshire or something, and maybe they'll let you back. I think that, you know, both, I think I had a good summer and impressed them, but also I think the industry was changing as well at that time. But I was on, like, sort of the front end of that, where I thought I was going to go to the Palm Beach Post and be sweating and learning how to speak Spanish for a couple of years.
When you say it was changing at the time, was this the beginning of the internet revolution with news?
I think that there became, like, less spots at other papers to begin with. The local news industry was contracting a bit, and so the idea of, like, you know, we cannot have, you know, people come straight here has been changing. It's much more common now. But at the time, you know, again, I was told, like, there's no way. So I was very fortunate to start my career at the Baltimore Sun, but I had a small town newspaper experience at the Sun. I was put in the Harford County Bureau, which is a suburban rural county east of Baltimore. And I was the only person, or at times there was 1 or 2 people, and I had to cover everything that happened: the schools, the government, crime. And I had to, like, change the light bulbs and the toner and the fax machine and get the mail. So, you know, while I was at the Sun, which is at the time a large paper, I had a small town experience to start.
So it was kind of like being in their minor league, I guess you'd call it.
Yeah. And we were sort of battling to get the attention of the editors and get on the front page and things like that. So, you know, again, you had to sort of be very deliberate about, you know, how am I going to get out of this assignment? How am I going to get out of Harford County and get downtown? You know, what kinds of stories are they looking for? And this might segue into a question you probably have teed up, but covering the schools, the government, the crime, I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do. I covered, you know, higher education, the administration at my University of Maryland. So at the time I said, I think I'm interested in education. But when I wrote the crime stories, they were inherently dramatic. They were inherently interesting, and the readers responded to them. And so I started to gravitate towards that. There was a gang trial, a young man who had sort of wanted to join the Bloods gang, if I recall correctly, had killed a cab driver in this, like, again, this sleepy, you know, community that didn't think they had a gang problem. And I sat through the trial, and I think I wrote daily stories about it. But I said to my editor, I really want to just, like, is it okay if I don't write a story every day and I write a recap that just goes into everything, and I pull together stuff that maybe didn't even happen at the trial, but, like, that I'm, like, able to acquire outside of it. And I wrote, like, a fairly, you know, long-ish story about this trial. And I just kind of decided that, you know, crime reporting, I thought, was interesting and something that I wanted to start doing.
Well, there's no question that crime, well, what's the old phrase? If it leads, it bleeds, right? Or if it bleeds, it leads.
Yeah.
I got it reversed. Yeah. So but if it bleeds, it leads means there's something dynamic happening, and that compelled you. Yeah.
Definitely. Yeah. And it was also that the readers responded, because I think, you know, when we do this, you know, you want people to want to read what you're doing. You want to get feedback. You want to hear from them that they're interested in it. And I felt like that was something that readers were responding to.
Well, so that took you down the road to being you focused on crime reporting then, yes?
Yeah, I mean, I bounced to a different bureau in my home county of Anne Arundel County, and there I got this is a good story. I covered a court case, a plea hearing, a sentencing, something of that nature, where a 22-year-old guy had pleaded guilty to helping his mom kill somebody. And I wrote a very short story, but I thought, this is interesting. I started to look into it a little bit more, and then I got a package in the mail, and it was a manila folder, and there was a race car on it, but it had come from the jail. He'd drawn a race car on a manila envelope.
Oh, wow.
Sent to me from the jail. And it was that man's younger brother, who was a juvenile. He's like 17 years old, I think, 16 maybe. And he had sent me a portion of the discovery in the case, which is when attorneys turn over evidence so that the defendant can educate themselves about the case coming against them. And he's very duplicitous. He wrote, very scheming. The letter that accompanied this portion of the discovery said, like, here's a taste. I know you'll want more. And so I started visiting this young man at the jail where he was locked up for helping his mom dispose of a body. And the mom was a con woman, and she'd schemed people over and over and over again. She'd been suspected of setting a fire on like Christmas Day that killed one of her husbands. Then she faked her own suicide to flee prosecution when she started scamming from a church where she was working in the accounting office. And then she killed, once she did barely any time for scamming the church after she got caught. She faked her suicide, adopted a new persona, but got caught. And then she killed a man she was dating. And I wrote a three-part series. They got picked up on like NPR's Weekend Edition at the time, which was pretty cool. And Dateline NBC wanted to do a thing on it, but Maryland doesn't allow cameras in courtrooms, so that they weren't able to make a thing about it. But yeah, so all this was sort of snowballing towards me becoming a full-fledged, crime reporter.
So is it ever overwhelming to you to report on such gritty stuff? Does it overwhelm you, or are you now used to it, or do you have a sort of a clinical look on it?
Yes and no. There are moments where sometimes the despair in the city in particular, I mean, these suburban stories were sort of like, again, these like sort of Lifetime, Dateline kind of things where it's like, can you believe this happened here? And the city is just, it has really, really significant problems.
Mm-hmm.
I stay, what's the word I use? The work propels me forward. There's always something going on that has to be done. And so you keep going and you keep going. I think in 2015, we saw a tremendous spike in gun violence. And I remember driving through the neighborhoods of West Baltimore and seeing a group of and I'm not a religious person, but a group of church folks who were walking through in a line. It was clear that they'd come to the city from outside the city. And I think the person at the front was holding a big giant cross. And it was just like, I don't know, something about that got me really, really emotional. Just that this moment in time, like things were so bad that like people were coming here to try to put good energy into the city. And there's individual stories that'll get you too, but for the most part, yeah, it's like, there's just something every day, here. And I guess it's, and I don't have to experience it so as acutely as a cop or as a first responder, right, or as a trauma surgeon. I'm there after it's over. I'm on the outsides looking in. Certainly we sit with grieving family members and things like that. But I would say that we're trying to reconstruct these things a lot of the time, and that I think that also helps keep some walls and boundaries up.
Am I correct that as a reporter, you would not allow yourself to become involved emotionally with the family members or with the police or whoever it is that is showing some form of emotion during a gritty moment, that you have to be somewhat detached or not?
I think that you got to be human, and with whatever's happening, you kind of go with it. I think where it comes in is like, sort of if keeping objectivity going, whereas if someone is maybe in the trenches of doing something, but they're doing something wrong, or they have a perspective that you need to sort of check and be keep a distance from, I was embedded with the Baltimore Police Homicide Unit in 2015, and I saw those guys working real hard, putting in extreme hours. I couldn't keep up with them. And yet I knew that like I had to like keep a perspective on like, well, maybe, if they're not doing this the right way, or they're going about something the wrong way, you got to make sure that even though they let you in, you've got to tell it like it is. But if there's a upset family member or somebody who you have a bond with. I mean, it's just only natural. It's only human nature that, you're going to try to, go with that. And,
And it's, I guess, then also very important that you capture the emotion of what's going on. You're not just reporting, as we said earlier, just the facts, ma'am. You're actually dealing with humans and their problems and their troubles and their concerns.
Yeah, absolutely. I've found myself doing stuff that I think maybe like in journalism school, you say, am I supposed to do this? And then you go, of course I'm supposed to do this. Like, this is a nice thing to do, bringing someone a meal or something, or giving them a hug. I mean, these are just normal things to do. And they're not even, with the goal of like maximizing your reporting. It's just, that's the way to be. That's how if you're trying to build a rapport with someone, if someone's feeling down, like these are just normal things to do.
Because we sometimes, again, I've been in the screenwriting business for a long time, and sometimes movies portray reporters as doing underhanded or sleazy things, just like they sometimes show the cops doing underhanded or sleazy things. And
I think reporters watch those movies the way like doctors watch a medical drama and say that's joke. Not the way that happened.
Yeah,
that would never happen. We would never do that.
I'm sure. And my guess is, from what you just said to me, no, it's not likely to happen if you are a caring human being at all.
Yeah, no, I mean, again, like I are there people who break the rules? Like, certainly, but I mean that, that's not who I work with. That's not how I do.
Right. All right. So what are the essential elements of what makes a good story good? What do you need to find within a story? Okay, you've got a crime, something's happened, someone's been murdered, or something else bad has happened. What are the essential elements? You're, I assume, still going for the who, what, where, when, why, and how, but what are the elements that you need to find in order to form a story that is going to work and get published, get printed?
Yeah, that's such a difficult question, because I really do get inundated every day. And at this point, having been in the city for 17 years, you mentioned I work for the Baltimore Sun. I'm still a working journalist for a nonprofit newsroom called the Baltimore Banner. It's brand new, trying to create a new sustainable model for journalism. And I get inundated with story ideas and tips and things like that. And I mean, I'm trying to think of how I can answer that. I mean, I don't want to say you just know, because that's a real cop-out, but I mean, there's got to be something compelling about it. There's got to be something. Are you looking
for a particular character to latch onto that you can tell the story through their point of view?
It depends on the story I'm writing. I mean, if I'm writing a story about a homicide victim, I think, yeah, I am. There are many homicide victims, unfortunately, in Baltimore City. We're almost at a murder a day this year, and not all of them. Everyone deserves to be written about. I think what you're looking for are two things. If you're writing about homicide victims, is there something about this story that is different and unique, or is it something that is tells us about the kinds of violence that happens every day?
Right.
Is this person the same type of guy who finds himself in the situation, and I can tell a broader story, or is this an extreme situation that you're never going to believe what happened here? But again, I get pitched a lot on people have things going on in their lives that are terrible and awful, and they were wronged, and I say to them, that's whenever I'm not going to do a story, I try to let people down gently by saying, what happened to you. I'm not saying it's not wrong, but it's not a news story, you need help. You need an attorney. You need someone to advocate for you. But this isn't a news story. And I'm struggling to try to figure out like sort of what the standard is for that, other than sort of you kind of know it when you see it. And I'm sure there's stories that I've passed on that I should have done because I didn't get it at that moment. I try not to waste people's time. I try to tell them, just can you distill this into what's happening and how I can help, or who's wrong, what can be fixed, things like that.
Can you think of an example of a story that you've done where it leapt out at you and you went, oh, there's a story right there. It almost writes itself.
I mean, I can think of one. It's not on point with what you're asking, but someone called me. I get a lot of calls from people who I would say are struggling with mental health, or they have difficulty explaining the situation. And someone called me basically saying that there'd been a sexual assault and there was a conspiracy to cover it up. And that to me is like a red flag because a lot of times, the idea that there's having covered the city and things like that, the system's often not working in concert. There's things just fail because people fail and systems fail, and the coordination, if they were able to coordinate things, they do a hell of a lot better job of coordinating things. Right. But I sort of started trying to break it down into tell me, so what happened first, what happened next, what happened then? And I started to hear that well, this person saw this broader conspiracy, like there was a story here, like this person was going through something that sounded wrong and could be documented and proven. This is a story that I'm working on at the moment. I'm trying to get it published. I'm having a hard time, but I believe in the story. I'm sticking with it. But yeah, again, a lot of times I'm trying I have people calling me who have very serious things going on, and I'm essentially asking them to break it down for me in like 5 minutes, because that's what I have to do. I have to break it down for the reader. I cannot go on and on and on and on. I have to tell them what the point is and, what the upshot of it is. So, yeah.
It's usually a question of, can you tell a story in a somewhat terse manner, but it's got color to it, that it's compelling in that way. And that's true for screenwriting as well. It's the same story where you must tell something in a way that's both compelling and not overblown.
Correct. Mm-hmm.
And that's what you're talking about.
Yeah. I mean, ultimately, things can be extremely complicated, but is there a way to streamline it so that people can get it? Is it accessible? Because if it's not accessible, then then you're going to lose people, and then there's no point. You wasted people's time.
And you have plenty of competition, so you really need to make it accessible as all get out.
It's not so much about competition. I feel competition mostly with among stories. I have so many things I could be doing, and if I'm going to devote time, why am I doing this?
Would you say
that's turn this around?
Would you say that's the most challenging aspect of your day-to-day work is figuring out what story to write because there are so many? Or what would you say are the most challenging aspects of what you do?
I think getting people to talk ultimately in most stories is the biggest issue. I mean, a lot, whether it's people who are pending criminal charges, people who distrust the media, people who, don't want to tell the truth. I mean, just like sort of breaking down walls and getting to the truth is I would say is probably the biggest challenge of all. In terms of story selection, yeah, I mean, I feel like we do have competition. I was at the Baltimore Sun for years, and we were the only game in town. It was TV news, but they do things a little bit differently. Now there's the Sun and the Banner, and there's a little bit of a different dynamic going on. But I'm still looking for stories that are original, worth telling, reveal something about either the city or systems or things like that, or just really interesting. I'm never going to say no to a story where someone says something really neat happened to me, or really, really interesting, or really terrible, and that is the story. There's nothing else to it necessarily. That's what it is. It's interesting. Read this because it's interesting.
I'm curious. You said that the challenge is sometimes getting people to talk. Do you have a particular technique that you employ to get people to open up a little bit to you?
I try to be very open. I try to say depending on the circumstance. If there's someone I'm coming after, basically, someone who's a bad actor who I'm trying to, I might try to back into that interview. But other people, I try to say, like, here's my agenda. Here's why I'm writing this. Here's what I know. Here's what I don't know. I need your help. I think this is important, and be transparent with people. Others, there's plenty of times I write about people who are in the wrong. And that's a different ball game altogether, where you really have to scheme out and strategize sort of, how am I going to go about this? There's a story I'm working on right now. And I really, I'm nipping around the edges of something, and I'm so nervous that it's going to get back to the people who are at the center of it, because I'm not ready for them to know I'm looking into it. So I'm trying to be extremely deliberate, extremely calculated about how I go about that. And I don't even know yet how I'm going to do it, but I know that day is coming, and I want to sort of a fresh crack at them, so to speak. So
you have to then, and no details obviously, but you then have to figure out how to work around the issue so that it doesn't become revealed.
I'm trying to gather as much as I can so that I go to that person in a prepared way, where if everything were to shut down, if suddenly this story just blew up, I would be in an okay place, because I'm there's probably a 85% chance with this story that the person I'm writing about isn't going to talk to me. So I want to make sure I'm very prepared for that moment and have as much in hand as possible. But I could spook them. I could step on a landmine and it gets back to them and everything changes. But there's only so much of that process that I can control.
Well, sure, of course. And have you had that happen in the past? And again, no, you don't need to detail it, but has it happened to you where you did spook somebody and they just clammed up and you couldn't get the information?
I can't think of any specifics, but I'm sure it has.
I see.
I'm sure it has.
What is your technique, or is it just brute force when you're on a very tight deadline and you have to deliver by a certain time and you're way up in the weeds where it's you've got a lot to do and no time to do it? Do you have a particular thought process or technique that you go through to deliver on time?
I'm trying to think. I mean, I think just letting people know, yeah, this is it. And a lot of people will say, well, we're not ready. We need more time. And sometimes you can give them that time and other times you can't. I'm not afraid to be firm with people. I'm not afraid to maybe yell at somebody from time to time, but I think I've mellowed out a lot actually over the years. But like this is happening. I need this. You need this. This story is going to go out there. Don't complain to me later. I don't know.
How is your job in that world, in the world of the streets, I guess it would be? How much background information do you also have to go get? How much research do you have to do aside from going out and just talking to people? Or is it all talking to people?
I think these days my journalism has transitioned to more, stuff where I'm researching things. Early on, yeah, something happens, go out and do it, and trying to juggle long-term work with the short-term work. At this point in my career, I think I have the luxury to be a little more deliberate. But there's I don't know if I should bring this up, but there was a story on Friday where it made national news, and I messed up. So I got a tip from the production side of a show that's filming right now for Apple Plus, starring Natalie Portman, based on a book by Laura Lippman called Lady in the Lake. And I heard from people on the production side of things that someone had threatened the production. They tried to get money. They tried to extort the production because they didn't like the filming. The filming was messing things up for them. And they threatened to shoot up the production and they wanted money, and filming got shut down for the day. So I reached out to the police department and I said, you heard anything about it, like an extortion or a threat on the Lady in the Lake set? And the spokesman got back to me immediately. And I was like, how did you, I thought you got to take time to look into this. I thought I might not hear from you for another day. How did you know this? And he goes, because we have officers working set security. So I had set security via the police department, along with production side sources saying a major production in town got shut down over a threat of violence and extortion. So we wrote a story. And I didn't feel, I wasn't doing it for any other reason other than that sounded like something people deserve to know. 2 days later, and the production company eventually issued a statement saying, yeah, somebody brandished a gun and we shut down production and we've increased security. The story fell apart. The police department said, we've investigated this further, and it was people who sort of had secondhand information and they kind of changed their stories. And actually it was probably like a street vendor who was asking to get paid and no one saw a gun. And the threat part, no one really can say who made the threat, and the story fell apart. And I've had egg on my face all week for that story. I pride myself on getting things not just first, but right. There was a shooting the other day in our neighborhood that was very important. Everyone was very interested in it, and everything I had was not just first, but accurate. And if I wasn't sure about it, I couched it. I was very careful, and I can point to that and say, I did a great job there. I screwed up on this other thing. And, I can't remember your original question that led me down this road, but
do you then do some form of a retraction, or what do you do in that case?
We rewrote a follow-up story saying that the police have said that what they told us before isn't true. But, I'm certainly wearing that as a journalist, where people say you weren't discerning enough. You didn't, you should have taken a pause there. And there's a lot of discussion across the country, not in recent years, but going on before that, about using stuff from police and sort of how often things don't turn out to be true, and how you can't do police said journalism. And I think it's a complicated thing. A lot of times we don't have access to the inside of the crime scene. We don't have access to the evidence, the witnesses, the things like that. And we're conveying a story via the people who have the information. And too often those narratives fall apart. But it's like in daily journalism, you're sort of relying on that. So I don't know. It's going to continue to be a challenge when people want to know what's going on, but you only have this one source to tell you about it. And so do you not do anything? Do you wait 3 days? Do you wait 6 months? Do you never tell the story? I mean, these are the kind of things we're sort of working through.
Well,
So
how often, as you're doing something like that, do you actually print the story that then triggers more reaction, or people come out of the woodwork? Does that happen?
yeah, absolutely. And to me, it's an imperfect process, and the best way to go about it is to stay on it. Stay on it. You know, if the case has been charged, it's going to try. If it was worth covering when the person was charged, then it's worth covering the trial. You know, and so being more selective, but staying with things, going in depth on them as they change, because they will change. Things will change. It happens all the time. I don't think we can sit out the story. I think we just need to stay on it. And I don't claim that to be a perfect process either, but I don't really know.
It can't be a perfect process, because you're following real life, and real life keeps unfolding.
Correct. And again, there's so many things that can't be known. There are people who, let's say someone's charged with a crime and they're innocent. They might not be willing to tell you that they're innocent because their lawyer's saying, don't say anything, or let's see how this plays out. Or, you know, there's so many reasons why we can't get everything. At the end of the day, I feel like the police department, they're paid by taxpayers, the people that we as a society, maybe not individuals, as a society, trust to handle these things. And this is what they're saying. I feel like all I'm saying as a journalist is this is what they said. It's not the truth. It hopefully it is, but this is like what they say now in this moment, and you should know what they're saying, because if it changes, we're going to point that out too. And,
without the fourth estate, you guys, we would be in a heap of trouble, I think. So, I think it's a good thing that you do what you do, and that reporters do what they do. And sometimes it's painful for people in charge of things, but we need you out there. You're a really big, a big influence and changer for our world to make us better, I hope. I think that's the goal. Anyway, I'm curious, you obviously write articles in which you quote people, and people are saying one thing or another. I'm in the business of writing dialogue. And so my curiosity about the way that you approach the way people speak, sometimes the way people talk is not interesting at all. How do you make folks sound interesting? Is it just verbatim quotes, or are you able to manipulate the way that people, I guess, evoke what they're trying to say or think, so that it's more compelling and interesting?
I'll never change a quote, for sure. I love dialogue personally. I think that the way people choose to say things, the way I think so much can be gleaned about who a person is, and just hearing people speak on their own. When I was writing the book, I was actually told, like, don't use so much dialogue. You're using way too much dialogue. And there was times where I said, I don't care. I love this dialogue. The only time it really comes into changing dialogue, I guess, is if, the question of, like, if something is said in a way that is so difficult to understand, or the slang, you might clean it up for somebody, but I try not to, because I think it's interesting to hear people speak in their own dialect. But I'm a huge fan of dialogue. And
are you selective in sometimes weeding things out that just are not interesting or compelling? Like, if the best example I can think of is, there's nothing less interesting than reading a deposition, because there's all those. You love them.
I love them.
But they're so full of ums and ers, and they never finish sentences.
Sure.
You like all that then, yes?
No. I wouldn't say it like that. I would say that, for example, in my book, there was wiretap dialogue where people were going back and forth. And there was one part where Jamel Rayam and Mamadou Gondo, two cops who are serving prison time right now, they go back and forth, just saying to each other, referring to their supervisor, he is off the chain. And he goes, he's off the chain, B. He is off the chain. He is off the fucking chain. And they go back and forth and back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And that's, my editor said, we get it. He's off the chain. I go, no, but it's funny how they're just sitting in their cars. The feds are listening, and this is how they're talking to each other. It's like, we need this. We need this dialogue. So, again, that doesn't mean use everything. Certainly, as a journalist, I sit through 5-hour court hearings, and there's tons of dialogue, and so you really are looking for the best one.
Well, that's what I was getting at. You actually have to make some selections. You can't print everything that somebody says, because sometimes it goes on for hours. Well, you can't do that, right?
Yeah, and I tend to use dialogue that's like sort of like punchy and just jumps out. But I also try to remind myself to use dialogue that can have actual information. So I think for a lot of times I will lead into dialogue saying, he said that, just to give a terrible example, but like, the prosecutor said that the sky was blue and that the day was over. And then there will be a quote that's like, and that's all she wrote or something, just sort of this like little like add-on at the end. Like I've actually trying to use dialogue more to like the actual, the first part, like what he said that was factual. So I go back and forth like that, sort of using it to either convey information or to sort of put a cap on that information.
It moves the story forward.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's really what it's got to do. Well, you already brought up your book, so that's a nice segue to talk about the Gun Trace Task Force and We Own the City. What made that such a compelling story? I already know the answer for myself, but you tell us why you were compelled by that particular story to not just report on it, but then to write a long form book.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say that it was compelling in and of itself. The officers, an entire unit of officers, caught doing, sort of extreme corruption. But for me, what made it more interesting was that it came during this period where the BPD was supposed to be reforming itself. So we had a period of time where crime was relatively down. Police thought that they were the reason for that. They thought that they were controlling crime, driving crime down. And then we sort of entered into this reform mindset of, okay, now that we have crime down, can we kind of try to fix this police department a little bit? And then Freddie Gray happens, which is among the Black Lives Matter movement that's sweeping the country at that point. There's a police, killing basically in every city. It seems like every couple of weeks there's marches in different cities, and there's a new case, and people are outraged. And then it's like, and then the Justice Department comes in and they say, we're going to fix the BPD, which is not something that I don't know why they didn't get here 20 years ago, 15 years ago, 10 years ago, but they say, we're coming to Baltimore. And you go, okay, well, blue skies are ahead. And these guys were doing this while the Justice Department was conducting their investigation. And it's like, it's almost like, wow, if that can happen under that circumstance, we're in big trouble. You throw in then, the mysterious death of a police officer who's implicated in the case. There was just a lot there. And the challenge was, how am I going to organize all this information?
So how long was the actual reporting? How long when did you start it and when did it end in terms of the story? How long did that last?
So I didn't have any goals of writing a book. I will confess I don't even read many books. I read journalism because I do journalism and I want to read stuff I can relate to so that I'm learning from it. I don't, if I read a 500-page book, but I got to write a 1,000-page article or 1,000-word article the next day. So I try to read like other articles that are like what I'm trying to do each day and learn.
Sure.
I read it in a very like functional way like that. And so I covered what happened with Freddie Gray, and I covered the trials of the officers, and then I covered the Gun Trace Task Force. And really, it was David Simon, the creator of The Wire, a former Sun reporter, who he contacted me during the trial and said, man, you got a book here. And I said, well, that sounds nice, but I don't know the first thing about that. How would I do that? And he said, I'll introduce you to my agent. So I did not go through the tough process of sort of having I would say it was a tough process, but I got a nice start. I got a nice head start. And he said, you
all you did was go to the top of the heap.
He called me.
And he called you. So there are literally tens of thousands of writers in Los Angeles who would take off their arm and hand it to you for that opportunity. And it came to you. So that's saying something.
The trial was winding down, the trial of the two officers who took the case to trial. And he even said at that point that HBO had interest in the show. But to me, that was so like, I know that he has many projects that he worked on that did not end up happening. I thought, well, that may happen, it may not. But if I write this book, that's something.
Well, at the end of the day, at least you'd have a book, if nothing else.
Yeah, but I also looked forward to it as an opportunity to really kind of compile the things I covered over the preceding at that point 10 years. Now even more. But this didn't just happen. Like there was a long path of getting to this point. And some of my colleagues had sort of floated the idea of us writing a book about the Freddie Gray trials, the officers charged with killing Freddie Gray, the trials.
Right.
And we sort of sketched out a couple pages of a proposal and gave it up. And they were like, that's not really going to happen. So it's kind of like, I guess it was a little bit in my mind already. about that. But again, I wasn't, this is completely David Simon's idea. I was just thinking about what's the next story I'm going to write? How am I going to write this for the paper? How am I going to write maybe a series on this for the paper? And
it's interesting to me that you had been working on the journalistic part of it for quite some time before he comes to you and says, this is a book and you should consider writing a book. It's interesting to me that he didn't come to you and say, can I option the rights to the story before you've written a book and take it off the table just with the articles, not with
I think there's two things at play there. I think he's, I think he wanted to give me that opportunity, and B, writing the book provided the source material for the show. I did the work. I was in the trenches gathering stuff that would become the basis for this show. Right. So essentially he was getting the writing part of the show, the research part of the show started early.
And how much had you done? Well, how many articles or how much time had been spent prior to him coming to you? And so you had a whole batch of stuff already. Yes, you weren't coming from nowhere.
Well, so the indictments fell out of the sky in February 2017. The officers go to trial in January of 2018. And at that point, when David plants the idea in my head of potentially doing a book, I'm far out from actually having a proposal, actually having a book deal. So I was still going about this as a daily newspaper journalist. My editor, Trif Alatzis at the Sun, once the trial was over, said, I want a series I want you to spend as much time as you need. I want you to get to the bottom of this. Who else knew about it? I want you to interview all the police commissioners. How does this kind of stuff happen? And spend as much time as you need trying to figure that out. Mm-hmm. And so I'm doing the book proposal on the weekends on the side. I'm turning in stuff that my agent is saying is terrible. We're not getting any interest from publishers, even though we're telling them that David Simon of HBO and The Wire is interested. I'm getting no bites, and I'm just focused on, doing that series for the paper. And so I did a series called Cops and Robbers that came out in the summer of 2019. And I think I got the book deal right around that time, maybe a couple months before, a couple months after. It's actually a blur. I don't remember. But I spent the next year and a half working for the paper, doing research that could then be parlayed into it. And then I took time off from the Sun, 6 months. I only took 6 months off where I continued to research the book and write the book. I wrote the book in about 6 months.
That's phenomenal. Did you work from an outline? How did you go through the process of actually developing the whole book?
The biggest challenge for the book was I looked at everything I had. I felt like I was looking out, like I'm on the pitcher's mound of a baseball stadium, and all the seats are all the different characters and events. And there was just so many things that I could possibly have gone with. And I had a friend named Will Hilton. He's a great reporter and writer, author of books, and who I didn't really know actually prior to this. And he said, you got to find one person, you got to find somebody that can anchor the whole thing. Mm-hmm. And it was such an obvious, at that point I was very lost and I didn't know how I was going to do this. And when he said it to me, it became immediately apparent that Wayne Jenkins, the sergeant, the leader of the group, was that person. That not only was he in charge of the gun trace task force, but he was the worst one of them. Not only could I track his career, but that really his career tracked with my history covering the police department. And he joined up in 2003, which is maybe 5 years before I started covering the department, but a period that I'm extremely knowledgeable about because I started then. And and so much of what I was covering had to do with the 5 years prior. I tracked him joining the department in 2003 through their zero tolerance policies and arresting everybody they could possibly arrest, to how he became this creature of these plainclothes units who was supposed to go after the bad guys with guns and the violent offenders, just as the department was embracing that sort of strategy. And then, and then from there. So, I mean, the biggest thing was that I wanted to pack in. So once I figured out that I wanted to anchor it around Jenkins, it was a matter of I wanted to include so many things. I wanted to have so many different viewpoints. I wanted you to see this from the view of good cops, of bad cops, of cops that you're not sure are good or bad, from drug dealers themselves, from innocent victims. I wanted everything. And my editor was really good at helping me to include as much as I can, but not make it so that it was too much to digest. And I really thought,
focus you. Your editor helped focus you.
Yeah, I was afraid that it was just going to be too dense and that people are gonna get lost. And I still think to this day that, maybe it's too dense, but people tell me that it's not, and that's great. I enjoy hearing that every time I hear that.
Well, there are so many characters in it, and you jumped the gun and actually anticipated a great question I had, and you've answered it, which is how did you figure out who to make your protagonist? Or I guess antagonist, protagonist, whatever you want to say, because Wayne Jenkins is a bad dude. And it's plainly obvious, especially the way that it's played out. And so it was a matter of finding the one who was the most extreme, is what it sounds like.
Now, yeah, I mean, he just happened to be the most extreme, the leader, and someone whose career had. There were some of these officers who are just kind of, they're there, they're participating in this stuff, but they're not that interesting. Like there's not a lot to go on there. There's not much more to like grasp onto. And Jenkins was like, like the Forrest Gump of the police department. He's always there when something's happening. He's all these big cases that it's like, oh, of course Jenkins was involved. And I was just like, and I really wasn't aware of him prior to him getting arrested. I had written about Daniel Herschel. I'd written about Jamel Rayam. Jenkins was not a name that meant anything to me really. And that was actually kind of like a shock, because having prided myself in covering this department, that wasn't a name I knew, but that's because we cover like homicides and we cover like the patrol districts who are the little mayors of their areas of town. And like these guys who wear jeans and backwards hats and go out in the middle of the night and pull people over on car stops. That doesn't make the news. That's not that interesting. And unless they get sued or they shoot somebody or something. And he hadn't been sued or really shot anybody.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Did you meet any of these guys? Did you talk to him or any of these other guys?
I tried really hard to talk to Jenkins, and he wouldn't go for it. I ended up speaking to everybody in his orbit, going back to his childhood that I could, to the point where I felt like I had a really good grasp on him. Corresponded with a few other officers. Some of them maintain their innocence, and they're not innocent. So that was, but I entertained those conversations a little bit. But
could you?
I was going to say, there's one officer, Maurice Ward, who I didn't actually get to meet him, but we corresponded extensively, and he was a great resource, because he was honest about what he did. He was willing to talk about it and be frank, and just like, here's how it worked. And that was a great window into that unit that went further than what had already come out.
Could you tell from talking to these other people that Wayne Jenkins had a certain charisma that was then helpful to developing the character further?
Yeah, I mean, I talked to officers not charged in the case, just officers who I knew, or officers who I'd never met before, who I tracked down, and they were able to give stories about, some of the stories that stand out are like, one officer recalled standing in the evidence control line to submit evidence, and Jenkins he said he was, and this is great. I mean, for a non-writer, for a cop to say this was pretty good and vivid. He said he was stomping around like King Kong, acting like he, I got like 2 guns tonight. What are you doing? And just very like this bravado that and then so yeah, I mean, everybody seemed to have a Wayne Jenkins story. It seemed like.
Interesting, very interesting. Were there any eureka moments when you were doing your digging around? Was there something that you just leapt out at you and went, holy moly, I never imagined that was going to happen?
I mean, it's not like a really dramatic thing, but I mean, watching body camera footage from mundane incidents where they violated people's rights were, as a white person from the suburbs, despite having covered this stuff and heard about this stuff, I mean, to really, we see a traffic stop when it's successful. They'll have a press conference and say that we pulled someone over for a broken taillight, and look at all this stuff we found. We found drugs and guns in the trunk, and the streets are safer because of this. I was watching body camera of people getting pulled over for doing nothing, and the cops found nothing. People who had driven 2 feet off of a gas pump because they didn't have their seatbelts on, which would never happen to you or me. We would never be stopped while we're still on the property of the gas station for not having seatbelts on. They all get pulled out of their cars. They don't even find anything. People sitting in their car in the middle of the day eating lunch, and they're getting their car searched because the car is parked a little bit too far from the curb. That's the kind of stuff that Black Americans go through, that they talk about, that, frankly, until you see it on camera like that, you're like, wow, that I think I can now appreciate that in a way that I couldn't appreciate it before. And so that was just that has stayed with me, because police will tell you, we stopped someone for a minor violation, but we got a big win out of it, and so we need to keep doing that. We need to stop people for minor violations, because you never know what it'll lead to. Someone who's wanted on a warrant for a murder, someone who's got a gun, and it's like, but they stop people so many times where that doesn't happen. And that gets talked about, that gets people grumble about that in their homes and to their friends and to their family members. And it doesn't, the public doesn't know about it unless they're experiencing it.
Mm-hmm. Do you have any other books in you? You ready to write something else?
So I get asked that all the time, and I have an idea. I just don't think it's commercially successful. And so I'm struggling with the idea of, I think it would be a valuable contribution to Baltimore's libraries, if not other libraries, but I don't know if anyone's going to pay me to do it or read it. But I think it would be, I'm certain it would be a good topic. I'll say this, it has to do with some things that went on here during the late 60s and early 70s. And I would really like to do it, but I don't have the, despite all this that has happened that has been so wonderful, I'm not confident enough to think I can just stroll into Random House again or another publishing house and say, I got another one for you. And they'll say, good, do it. So
but I would be willing to bet you if you approach them, you could at least find out.
I'm trying to develop it a little bit more. We'll see.
All I know is that I watched the entire series because I'm fascinated by how that works. And it was really wonderfully told. Would you say that the series was really reflective of the book? Was it?
Absolutely, to the point where I was really I would say flattered. Like I did not think it would track as closely with the book as it did. I honestly thought that David Simon did me a solid. He hooked me up, and they were going to make their own show that had no bearing on what I did. And I was really glad that it has a lot to do with what I did. And that's partly because I was part of the writer's room. I was in the writer's room. I was helping out. I was throwing out examples, even stuff that didn't make the book. I would say, this didn't make the book, but this might actually help illustrate the point that you're trying to make here. So, and even the fact that they kept the title. I mean, I never thought they were going to keep the title. I thought they would come up with something. That title was...
Oh, that's a good title. That's a great title.
Oh, you should have seen some of the alternatives that were suggested. And I said, I think this is good. I think it's ominous. I think it conveys this sort of authoritarianism and it's ominous and I like it. And it just stuck. And then for them to use it, I was like, wow, that's amazing.
Oh, I think it was a very good title. And I think they were wise to use it. I don't think that was a bad call on their part at all. Have you thought about writing screenplays?
Not really. And
you have lots of stories to tell.
It's not that I don't like to. It's not that I don't want to, but I really do. I thrive on these real life things. I really do think that truth is stranger than fiction. And I feel like there's so many, maybe something I could do something that's loosely based on a true story, because there are so many amazing true stories that I cover. I find myself very interested in, I really would like to do a documentary, but scripted stuff, I don't have the confidence to do that. I don't think I could pull that off.
Well, there's lots of great feature films that are made out of real life stories. So I wouldn't throw that idea totally away, because I think you'd probably write a heck of a great screen story. Well, I've been speaking to Justin Fenton for a little less than an hour at this point, and we're going to wind this thing down a little bit. And I'm just wondering, in all your really very interesting experiences, especially on the streets of Baltimore, have you ever had an experience that you can share with us that's either weird, quirky, strange, offbeat, or maybe just plain funny?
Again, there's so many things I cover that are draining and awful, and I can tell you plenty of times where I was scared or something bad happened, but in terms of something fun, I'm struggling. But one thing that came to mind was how I met David Simon. I was a young reporter at the Sun. I'd only been on the beat a couple years. I was certainly aware of him, and in awe of him. And he had, I'd written a series of articles about how the Baltimore Police Department no longer was going to name officers who shoot people, which seems so unbelievable now in the current context of things. But around 2009, they said, you know what, we're not going to name officers who shoot people. You shouldn't know that. And I wrote stories about it. I realized it was happening because they weren't releasing the names. I called attention to it, wrote a front page article or follow-ups. And David reached out to, I think one of my colleagues at the Sun, who he knew better than me at that point. And he said, I'm going to write something about this. And so we were very eager to see what David Simon was going to write about and weigh in on this. And it appeared, he said, it's going to go in the Washington Post. The Post is going to take my op-ed. So I woke up on a Sunday morning to see what his op-ed said. And it said, in Baltimore, no one left to press the police. And it was this essay about how the media was so weak and had been so, just taken apart by corporate vultures that the police could do anything they wanted to because the media wasn't going to be there to call them out. And I'm thinking to myself, but I'm writing about this. Like, I've written this, I'm like calling attention to this. Like, what are you talking about? So I didn't know him. I knew where he lived. And I like went over to his house and knocked on the door. I think I was like half dressed. And I mean, I wasn't like banging on the door, like, Simon, come out, it's time to fight. But I said, I want to talk to you about this. This is crazy. And so his wife, the novelist Laura Lippman, opened the door and closed it on me. And then David came to the door and opened up and said, let's go talk. And he invited me in, and we talked, and he explained how it wasn't about me. It was about the media. Like, if we don't do something about the media shrinking and things like that, like this is a problem, and don't take it personally. And we kept in touch ever since then. So here we are, where he's he had me in a writer's room of a show, and I got to play myself in 2 episodes, and that's how it all started. I wouldn't use that as something people shouldn't think that will get them ahead in like confronting people at their homes on Sunday mornings, but that's what I did. And
no, that's sometimes you'll get introduced to the police in a different way if you do that the wrong way. And for the listeners who may not know, David Simon, who, as Justin already said, created The Wire and is a very good writer. He was also a reporter for a long time at the Baltimore Sun, correct?
Correct. Yes. Mm-hmm.
So that's a natural connection there. So last question for you today, Justin. What's a good, solid piece of advice or a tip? You've already given us lots of very good things to chew on, but a solid piece of advice or a tip for maybe somebody that's starting out in the business, or maybe in a little bit and trying to get to the next level. What is it that you do that you can advise someone would be good that you do?
Yeah. And I mean, I think everybody's situation is going to be different. And obviously when I was coming up in journalism, things have changed so much, and social media and things like that. But I just feel like a one thing that is relatable, that that can carry across different situations is, for me, I've always wanted to be seen as someone who owns the topic I'm covering. I want to be seen as the authority. I want to be seen as, if something's important to you, it's important to me. I remember cops saying to me, why are you going out to crime scenes at night? I was like, because you guys are. If you guys are out here, I want to be out here. This isn't a 9-to-5 job. You're not going to get ahead. You're not going to find out the things you need, make the connections you need by working banker's hours. I work whatever it takes to get stuff done. And I want to be seen as an authority. And I think that, hopefully, people have asked me about making sources, and it's like making friends. It's like, how can you really describe how you made a friend? It just happens, but you can improve your luck by working really, really hard and putting yourself in situations to meet people, make connections. And that's the best I can think of. So
I think that helps. That's phenomenal advice. You in anything that anyone does, you want to try to be the best of the best. And that's what you're talking about. You want to rise above. And that is just outstanding advice. But Justin Fenton, this has been an absolutely fascinating, terrific hour on StoryBeat. And I can't thank you enough for sharing some of your time and especially your wisdom and experience with us today.
I appreciate you having me on. I appreciate the great questions and conversation. Thank you.
And so we've come to the end of today's StoryBeat. If you like this episode, won't you please take a moment to give us a comment, rating, or review on whatever app or platform you're listening to. Your support helps us bring more great StoryBeat episodes to you. StoryBeat is available on all major podcast apps and platforms, including Apple Podcasts, YouTube, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, TuneIn, and many others. Until next time, I'm Steve Cuden, and may all your stories be unforgettable.